Hey guys, how's it going? Preparing here. So yesterday I spent a bunch of money right after I spent all my gold in Hearthstone. I was suffering from a gold bug. I mentioned it to a few people and a lot of people didn't really know what I was talking about. And I want to tell you guys a story of why all that shit happened, leading up to the point where I ended up getting a lot of legendaries at the end of the day, and it ended up that it got me thinking about which are really the best ones and what order I'd place them. So back to the beginning, the reset happened. I started doing some arenas. I was doing very well. I was starting from about 3,000 gold, which is what they refunded because I did pay the 199 shit several times, I guess. And I was up to like 4,200, back down to 4,000, 38, back up to 4,000. Going around there, doing very well. And it just happened that 2 days ago, whenever I would gain gold, it wouldn't be added to my gain gold. It would just, nothing would happen. It would just disappear. And this would happen after a logout. So, let's see, I'd be at 3,000, and then I'd win an arena, 9 wins, get 300 gold. I wish. Log in, log back, and bam, it's gone. Nothing's there. Just 300 again. And because you sometimes spend gold to get into arena, if you pay the 150, and in other cases, the gold is actually subtracted instead of added to begin with. And as a result, I lost like 1,400 gold, and I didn't really know how to fix the bug. I didn't really know what I was supposed to do. So I wanted to see if I could abuse the bug, and what I did is I got to 0 gold. I spent all my gold with and bought packs. I bought like 27 packs or 28 packs, something like that. Got to exactly 0 gold, and the bug was no more. And, I got a decent number of cards, but looking back, I didn't really get that many. In the past, prior to this, I just played the game, doing arena and getting cards through arena. And that is probably the best way to play it. You definitely get a sense of accomplishment when, you get some really nice cards, and avoiding the monetary input, at least from buying the cards directly, I think is a really, really good way to play the game. But seeing as there's a Blizzard tournament that I'm going to be part of pretty soon, and I have to submit my deck list, and I need 3 decks, not 1, but 3. I'm going to need a lot of cards, and while before the reset, which happened about a week ago, I actually had almost all the cards that I wanted to play several different classes. I'm pretty far from that point in the game right now, largely because it took me about a month of every single day gameplay to get to that point. And have to do it all over again, but the time frame doesn't really allow for such a period, and I'm going to need a few more cards because instead of one deck, I'm going to have to experiment with most of them, and I just need a lot more cards than I had, and I realized I wouldn't be able to get them all. So, I came to the point where it's like, I asked the chat, do you want to see me open some packs? So I opened the packs, and then I opened a lot of packs. I think I spent like $200 or some shit on packs. And, it's kind of a waste of money, but, in the end, Blizzard is going to cover some of the costs of going to BlizzCon, so it evens out just fine in my book. But all in all, when I was opening the packs, I got a few pretty cool legendaries. Let me show you guys here. Probably the coolest one, I guess, would be the foil Deathwing. I got several other legendaries. I haven't really crafted any yet because I still plan on doing arena a good bit longer before I start getting into the deck stuff. So I think maybe in about a week, maybe a bit more, something like that, I should have enough cards combined with enough dust to craft and play through all the type of decks that I want to try in order to try to, do moderately well at BlizzCon. I don't really care if I win at BlizzCon. I mentioned it on stream yesterday. If I queue up against like Trump and, it's a close game and I lose, and it's whatever, good game. But there's other people that are invited to BlizzCon that I don't think I could stand losing to. And I'm not going to call any shots here, but I did call some shots on stream, so you guys can maybe look at that if you want. But there's a certain kind of level of play that I'm comfortable losing to, and others that I'm not. So we have to at least meet, some part of the bar here to not embarrass ourselves over at BlizzCon. But anyway, back to the cool things. The legendaries. There's a lot of legendaries in this game, and the reason the game is largely not pay to win is because a lot of legendaries suck ass. And each class has one legendary, and I'm sure you guys have seen most of them, but just to recap quickly, I got Cenarius, which is very good. In this game, I want to explain, I'll use Cenarius as a guideline, that damage is important. Your opponent has to die, but more often than not, you're going to win the game by controlling the board. And to control the board, you typically need value out of each card. And value means that for one of my cards, I want at least one of my opponent's cards. And this sets up a meta game where attack is not really as important. So what I mean by this is most creatures don't have 5 life or more. So 5 damage is fine. But 8 life is a lot, because for the same reason, most creatures don't have 5 attack or more either. So this guy is more than likely going to kill off 2 creatures just because of his stats. And this wouldn't be true if he had 8 damage and 5 life, because if he had 8 damage and 5 life, he'll probably be played and then be immediately killed by like a 5/5 creature or something like that, where a 5/5 creature, would have to kill itself, and then something else would have to happen for him to die. So when you look at stats, in the high end, it's very important to have high life. In the low end, high damage is important. For instance, anything with 0 or 1 damage is considered crap in this game because it dies for nothing, typically. But if you have 2 damage, you can typically kill another creature that's 2 mana. With 3, you can typically kill a creature that's 3 mana, and so on. But the damage kind of hits a point where around 4, 5, maybe even 6 mana, life becomes substantially more valuable. So a lot of legendaries that I consider good are the ones that are very hard to kill, or have a lot of life, or do alternative shit. So Cenarius, for instance, he spawns 2 2/2 taunt creatures. Yeah, he can give you your minions +2/+2, but as a druid, that's typically not going to be his primary use, because if you have a lot of creatures, your opponent is probably dead by the time you get to 9 mana. So, for 9 mana, you get a 5/8, which typically kills 2 creatures, and you get 2 2/2s, which can typically kill another creature. So getting a 3-for-1 of Cenarius would mean that Cenarius is quite excellent of a card. And, other classes have, 8/8 charge, pretty cool stuff, nothing special. Antonidas is great. The stats are a little lackluster, but still quite good. Tyrion, another thing you have to keep in mind with legendaries is how prone are they to silence. Tyrion is an excellent legendary if he doesn't get silenced. But then he gets silenced. And then he sucks. Silence may take out the abilities, and 6/6 may die to another card, so you're probably, in the worst case, you're getting like a 1-for-1. But typically with a legendary, you want a bit more. The reason Tyrion is pretty good for like a paladin deck, and the reason some of these legendaries are good for this specific class, is because it works well with the other cards. So for instance, paladin is actually prone to silence, and the way to combat this is to have a ton of cards that need to be silenced. And by the time you get to 8 mana, your opponent typically doesn't have silence anymore, so it ends up being very valuable to the deck. But as a standalone card, it's pretty crappy, as far as legendaries are concerned. And that happens to be the case with a lot of other ones. Priests have Velen, which I ended up getting yesterday, a pretty cool card when combined with Faceless Manipulator. Apparently it stacks, so you can have double your healing, and then Facelessing it, quadruple your healing, then Facelessing it again, have 8 times your healing or damage, to the point where you can use a Mind Blast and hit him for 40 damage. So some pretty crazy combos there that I plan to experiment with. Van Cleef is a good card. The issue is that because he doesn't have stealth anymore, he is prone to silence, and most rogue cards do not need to be silenced. So typically a player will have a silence ready for this card, making this card pretty terrible. Elakir is probably the example of the worst legendary. For 8 mana, a 3/5, regardless of the abilities, is really not going to suffice. A 3/5 might even get killed for free against a 5 or a 6 drop creature. So very, very crappy card. You have Lord Jaraxxus, which the battle cry is everything. I'm sure you guys have seen Jaraxxus. But I'm not going to talk about the class legendaries too much. And you have Grom and all that. The main important ones are the neutral ones, because most decks are going to consider the neutral ones whereas if you're playing the particular class, it's just a yes or a no for the one legendary attributed to that class. But when it comes to the neutral ones, I have like a rating system where I think I have it kind of figured out which legendaries are really good and the others which are kind of meh. So most legendaries, especially the neutral ones, follow into the meh category. They're pretty crappy. They might do okay, like Nat Pagal. If the other guy doesn't have a creature and you can protect him, you might get a card, maybe you get 2 cards, maybe you get 3 cards. But on average, you're pretty much looking at an arcane intellect that can get silenced. So it's kind of like whatever. And most legendaries are like that. You have some, horrible ones like Millhouse Manastorm, where it looks good and then your opponent, does some crazy shit the first turn. High risk and moderate reward legendaries, but overall, most of them, again, are not too impressive. Out of the ones that I got, I'm still missing a lot of the ones that I want, and that happens to be the case, but I can still show you guys through this card editor here. So this is the number 1 legendary, in my opinion, in the game. 412, in my opinion, is the best assortment of stats. So obviously, you have Deathwing, which is a 12-12, and 12 is bigger than 4, but, in the general sense, without the far extremes, 412 is a combination of stats that appears on more than just this card, and it is pretty much the absolute best stats because it provides a creature that is very, very difficult to kill, and 4 damage is usually enough to kill most creatures on the board. And the reason Ysera is number 1 is when you play Ysera, you still get your dream card. The dream cards include, a 0 to cost, return a creature to owner's hand, deals 5 damage to everything except Ysera. The 2 mana for a 3/5 cannot be targeted creature, 4 mana for a 7/6 Drake, and what's the last one? Oh yeah, Nightmare. You have a +5/+5 power overwhelming for 0 mana, and the creature doesn't die until the next turn. And you can cast that on your opponent's creature, so if you want to do that combined with freezing the creature, then you can kill it off. So some pretty crazy stuff there. And the main thing is that even if you play Ysera just once, you still get the dream card, even if she happens to somehow die next turn. And this is very significant because when you're considering board control and card advantage and all that, you're pretty much gaining a really powerful card anyway. Regardless of the situation, you're still getting that dream card. And as a result, your opponent will have to typically use at least 1 card to kill off Ysera. Maybe like Assassinate, something like that. Maybe like Polymorph would be the strongest kind of options. But even if they do that, they lose that card. Yes, you lose Ysera, but you still have your dream card, so you still come out ahead. And there's almost no situation where Ysera will actually put you behind. And that's really the important part. The stats are excellent, as I mentioned. 4 is the sweet spot. 4 is the best attack you can have, just because it cannot be Kodoed, it's not 2 or less, it cannot be Shadow Word Pain, it's not 3 or less, it can't be Shadow Word Death, it's not 5 or more, it can't be Big Game Hunter, it's not 7 or more, it can't be Big Game Hunter with an Iron Dwarf because it's not 5 or more. With 5 you can buff it for 2 attack with the Iron Dwarf and then kill it off with the Big Game. So almost always you're going to see some serious cards burned on Ysera. If Ysera gets out of control, if you're looking at like 2 or 3 turns on the field, the game is over. Just the dream cards alone are going to push you the victor in the game. Because it's not like drawing 1 extra card a turn. You're drawing a ridiculous card every turn. So you're drawing pretty much like 1.5 cards every turn, on top of it being a very difficult card to kill. And that's pretty much why Ysera, in my book, is the number 1 legendary in the game. I actually have to rate it above all the class legendaries as well. I don't think there's a single class legendary as valuable, as powerful, as game-changing as Ysera. And eventually, maybe I'll craft a foil one, but for now, we'll see what we'll get in the next week or so. Number 2 on my list is Ragnaros. Ragnaros is really strong. He is 8 for an 8/8, and when you consider value, his ability triggers at the end of the turn in which you play him. So that's significant because even though, let's say the best possible answer to Ragnaros is that he gets Big Game Huntered, right? If he gets Big Game Huntered, which is essentially he gets killed and he still gets a creature for his card, which is typically a 1 for 0, you still dealt 8 damage to something. And that pretty much is often better than a card, but even if you rank it as one card, it's still a 1 for a 1, because you still dealt the 8 damage and your creature disappeared to the big game hunter. So the 8 damage compensates for the big game hunter play. And every other play in the game, you're typically going to get better value out of Ragnaros. The other parts that make Ragnaros very interesting is while cards like Ysera can be silenced, cards like Ragnaros have a very silence punishing ability. And the reason this is, he can't attack and he does 8 damage directly, but if you silence him, you also silence the ability that he can't attack, so he becomes a creature that can attack. While often this is not ideal, it's typically better that he isn't silenced, in my opinion at least. He is still, a very valuable part of the board, and you're typically going to get a good amount of value out of him just because of his stats. So as a result, just being a very tenacious creature, much like Ysera, and giving some kind of guaranteed value, much like Ysera, this is one of my top picks as well. This is number 2 on my list. Number 3, there are a lot of really crazy legendaries out there, some really crazy combos, but in terms of the general sense, number 3 will have to be Cairn. Cairn is really strong. When I first looked at this card, it wasn't anything impressive. It's like, 6 mana for 4/5, and then you get silenced. But typically, your opponents will have silenced other stuff prior to turn 6, especially if you're playing a lot of decks with constructed cards. In Arena, you might get silenced a little bit more often, but in my experience, he hasn't been. And the reason this is so strong is you almost always guarantee that you have a creature at the end of the turn. So for 6 mana, you get 2 creatures, essentially. You get 2 4/5 creatures. 4 is the best possible attack, and 5 is a pretty solid amount of health. 5 health can very rarely be trumped by even another 4-drop. So you're looking at another 5-drop to kill it off. And even if that's the case, it's not going to be able to kill off the second form. And the reason that's significant is, even if you have a creature that's going to attack it, that's much more powerful, you can typically finish off the creature that attacked it with some random cards. It's typically going to be the case where like a 6/6 attacks it, it has 2 life left, and you can finish it off if you're a paladin with some recruits, or the consecrate, or just some kind of area ability that most classes have. And you still get the creature, so board control can often be taken back just because of this card. It's a very simple card. It's not quite on the level of Ysera or Ragnaros, but because it's 6 mana instead of 8 and 9, the potential is much greater on the early part of the games. So there's that, and I won't go into too much detail. Number 4 is Leroy. He's a pretty simple card, but he's a really good finisher. You can attack your opponent with it, and then you can hand it back to your hand for safety, or you can play Leroy and use a card like Consecrate to get rid of the whelps. Basically, he's a very cool combo card, he's a very good finisher, and it's just a very decent card to have in any deck that decides to burn down your opponent. A lot of decks are basically built around control, and Leroy is the opposite, but there are always those other decks out there anyway. Number 5 on my list, which will kind of conclude this, is pretty close call between Sylvanas and Hogger, but I had to give it to Hogger just because Hogger is a devastating card to play at the end of the game. So what this means is, near the end, when you have maybe 1 or 2 cards in your hand, maybe there's 1, maybe there's 0 creatures on the board, and your opponent is in the same situation, you're going to be in the case where you're just playing whatever you draw from your deck. And in that case, it's very difficult to play more than 1 creature each turn. And at that point, it can be impossible to win a game if the opponent draws Hogger. And the reason this is, every turn you're getting a taunt, so you're never going to be able to attack Hogger at all. So you're going to come to a situation where you just get withered away just because of this card. Hogger is not that strong if he gets overwhelmed the next turn, but if you're already winning, Hogger can pretty much seal the deal. Hogger is pretty good just because it's 6 for 6/6 worth of stats at the very least, and part of it is taunt, so it's not terrible if he dies instantly, but often he doesn't, and he can be combined with other things to make him way stronger. Combining him with something like Faceless Manipulator, so you can spawn 2 taunts every turn, or combining him with other more clever things like the Master of Disguise, giving Hogger permanent stealth, so you just get a 2/2 at the end of every turn, and it's very hard to kill a stealth 4/4 creature, at least for most decks. It can be some pretty devastating, moves for your opponent. Overall, legendaries are pretty sweet. People have tried to make decks with, way too many of them, and the problem with that is not so much that you can't have too many legendaries in the deck, it's mostly the fact that most legendaries suck ass. But the ones that I've mentioned here today, I hope you guys have, kind of understood my perspective at least in how they are used and how cards in general are useful in Hearthstone. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.